In Pakistan, it's budget season, but there's a catch. Usually, budgets are supposed to impress the citizens. In Pakistan, that's not the case. Their budget was meant to impress the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And did it? Well, most experts say no, it did not. Let me get you up to speed. Pakistan is facing a major balance of payments crisis. It means they don't have enough foreign exchange, barely enough to cover 1 month of imports. And I've been saying this for months now, so you can imagine for how long Pakistan has been in this mode, barely scraping through, getting only enough money to survive month on month. It is on the edge. It is seeking help from the IMF. In 2019, they struck a $6.5 billion bailout deal. So the IMF was supposed to give Pakistan $6.5 billion. Out of this, $2.5 billion is still left. Pakistan wants this money urgently. And that deal expires at the end of June, at the end of this month. So if the IMF does not agree to give that money in the next 15 days, there will be trouble for Pakistan. It could run out of forex. How does the budget figure in this discussion, though? You see, the IMF is a strict lender. They will give you money, but they also set big conditions. They want more reforms, less subsidies, lower deficits. That's what the IMF wants. And that's where the budget in Pakistan, or anywhere for that matter, plays an important role. If the budget is reformist, the IMF is happy. In the case of Pakistan, they don't seem to be. Let's look at the numbers. Pakistan's total spending will be around $50 billion, which is more than last year. So they're spending more. But budgets are not really about spending more. They're also about how you're spending that money. In the case of Pakistan, around $6 billion is allocated to defense. That's around 13% of the spending for defense. Around $25 billion will be set aside for debt servicing. That's loan repayment and interests. Now, do you see the problem here? Around 63% of the spending is on military and debt. It's not ideal when you're hoping to please the International Monetary Fund. Another number to note is the budget deficit. What's that? Deficit is the difference between revenue and expenditure. If you spend more than you earn, then you are in deficit. For instance, if you earn $10, but you spend 12, then your deficit is 2. It's simple subtraction. Pakistan is aiming for a deficit of 6.54%. And to give you some context, their current deficit is 7%. So they're aiming for slightly less, but probably not enough for the IMF. They're looking for some structural reforms in the budget. Instead, this is what they got: more subsidies, more development projects, and even more wages. Civil servants in Pakistan will get a 35% hike. State pensions will be 17% higher. And don't get me wrong, people being paid more is not a bad thing. In fact, it should be encouraged. But Pakistan is paying people with money it doesn't even have. Their priority should be long-term. Just think back to India's budget in 1991. It was a bitter pill back then. But look at the returns over the next 30 years. India is now the 5th largest economy in the world, so it's all about trusting the process, about the political will to trust the process. Pakistan, unfortunately, does not have that. The IMF has around 15 days to take a decision, and we're talking about a complicated process here. They have to circulate documents, they have to consult shareholders, take political inputs. Can all of this be done in 15 days? Officials in the IMF are not so confident. They're looking not just at this latest bailout, but also the long term, because Pakistan will need more programs. They will need more bailouts in the future. Their traditional lenders, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are shaky. So the IMF is really their best bet. But lenders want to see political stability. Pakistan doesn't even have that. In 60 days from now, the Shehbaz Sharif government will complete its tenure. After that, there will be an interim government. What about elections? Well, they may happen in November, or before that, or not happen at all. In Pakistan, you cannot be sure. And this is why the International Monetary Fund is worried. The recent clash between Imran Khan and the army does not inspire confidence. In this instance, the army has nearly won, but it also shows how precarious the civilian institutions are. So let me sum up the situation for you. The budget has no reforms. The election may or may not happen. The army is getting more money, and the IMF is far from convinced. So will Pakistan still get a bailout? We'll keep you posted. Most of us shop online. Our online carts are getting bigger by the day. But did you voluntarily pick those items you bought? Or were you tricked into it? And don't be confused, most of us don't recognize these tricks. They're called dark patterns. They trick you into buying things or subscribing to a service. Most online retailers do it, but now the government of India is on to them. The Consumer Affairs Ministry of India has met major e-commerce giants. All the bigwigs were in attendance, like Flipkart, Zomato, Amazon, Big Basket. The government says consumers should not be tricked. They say consent by deceit is not consent. So what's the plan of action? We'll get to that, but first, let's understand these dark patterns. How do they work? Well, they come in different forms, like disguised advertisements, forced continuity, or bait and switch. Different tactics, but the same objective, to trick you into clicking buy. Since I mentioned three types, I'll explain them. First, disguised advertisements. What are they? Take a look at this website. It's a download link from a Mac software. But how many download buttons do you see? 3. Only one is the real download button. The rest are fake. If you click them, you're forwarded to another website. This is false advertising. It's an ad masquerading as a download link. Next, we come to forced continuity. What is that? Assume that you've used your credit card for a streaming service. It was supposed to be a trial. You paid money through your card. But the next month, you get charged again. Why? Because the service has an auto-renewal policy. You did not see it. It was probably buried deep inside their terms and conditions. That is forced continuity. And finally, bait and switch. All of us have seen those golden offers or sales. A tablet for $100. It's a pretty good deal, right? But you click on it, and the product is out of stock. Instead, the website offers you other products, other similar products, like another tablet for $105 or $110 or more. Do you see what just happened? You got baited with a $100 offer, but once inside, the seller switched with a more expensive one. Hence, bait and switch. Now think back to all those purchases you made online, gadgets, home appliances, clothes, whatever you bought. Do you think you were tricked? Chances are at least some of you were, and these are just some of the dark patterns at play. There are dozens more of them, like phishing emails. Take a look at this one. It says your password expires in 24 hours. Click below to set a new password. Spoiler alert, there is no password. If you click on it, you get redirected to a website. Sometimes these emails will also have a timer just to nudge you along. All of these tactics are illegal and deceitful, which is why the government is cracking down on them. They've asked online retailers to impose ethical guidelines, also to carry out independent audits. The objective is to weed out such strategies, but consumers will also have to be educated about what's happening here. Most people cannot identify these dark patterns. So in their mind, it's not cheating. But every now and then, the online platforms get called out, and you can thank social media for that. Let me show you this incident from last year. A man from Mumbai did an apple-to-apple comparison. He bought the same stuff from the same restaurant. The first time he bought offline, the second time through a food delivery app. Now look at the difference. The offline bill was 512 rupees. The online bill for the same product was 690 after applying discounts. That's almost 34% more. What explains this difference? In one word, commissions. Most delivery apps charge up to 30% commission for generating business. But the restaurants try to avoid that. How do they do it? By increasing the overall price. They put the commissions burden on us, the consumer. And don't forget the other charges that almost always apply, like packaging or extra distance. So put together, you end up paying a lot more. What's the solution here then? One is more regulation. The other is leveling the playing field. Let me introduce you to ONDC, the Open Network for Digital Commerce. It's a government-backed online retail network. You can find all kinds of sellers on it. Restaurants, grocery stores, gadget hubs, even fashion. ONDC, by the way, is doing quite well. It clocked around 30,000 orders last weekend, 30,000 over the weekend, and most of it was food and beverage. More and more consumers are switching to ONDC, and why is that? Because things are cheaper here. At first, this was because of massive discounts. But on the 1st of June, ONDC reduced those incentives. Now you get 3 discounts per day. Even then, the orders are zooming. What does that tell you? A, maybe there is more trust in a government platform, and B, it is still cheaper. That's a strong message for all those e-commerce giants. India's digital consumer market is worth $500 billion. It was $500 billion in 2020. By 2030, it could hit $1 trillion. Those consumers want the best deals. They don't want dark patterns or hidden charges. You know, there's one more peace deal that Xi Jinping attempted. The one between Russia and Ukraine. It was a 12-point peace plan, but it found zero takers, sank without a trace. Meanwhile, the war is intensifying, both with missiles and words. Both sides are reporting exaggerated gains, and both sides are padding up the enemy's losses, which is nothing new for either Putin or Zelensky. So take their statements with more than a pinch of salt. Having said that, Vladimir Putin addressed the press yesterday. He said that Russia had lost 54 tanks in a week, which is a rare admission of losses. Guess what he said next? He said Ukraine had lost 160 tanks and that Ukraine's counteroffensive was not going well. Our next report examines the claims and counterclaims.
Who is winning the war? Not Ukraine, if you ask the Russian president. He says their counteroffensive is a disaster.
Their losses are approaching a level that could be described as catastrophic. If we take irretrievable losses, it is clear that the defending side suffers fewer losses, but still this ratio of 1 to 10, as they say, is in our favor. We have 10 times less than the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine.
Putin was addressing the press on Tuesday. He said Russia has 10 times less losses than Ukraine. But in absolute numbers, he admitted Russia is faring worse.
They lost over 160 tanks and over 360 armored vehicles of various types during this time. According to my calculations, it is 25 to 30% of the equipment that has been supplied to Ukraine from abroad. There are not only, as I said, over 160 tanks and 360 infantry fighting vehicles. This is not all NATO equipment. Soviet-made armored vehicles are also being destroyed there, but both Bradleys and the Leopards are burning really well. As for our losses, let the Defense Ministry speak on other data, on personal losses. But as for the tanks, as I've said, they have lost over 160, we have lost 54. Some of them can be restored and repaired.
So Putin says Ukraine has lost over 500 vehicles. About a quarter of these are Western supplies. Some Leopard tanks and Bradley armored fighting vehicles have been destroyed. And Russia has lost about 54 tanks. There's of course no way to verify the exact figures. Ukraine and the West will dispute Russia's version.
Thanks to everyone who is fighting, who protects and advances our positions. For example, the Bakhmut sector. It is, in particular, the soldiers of the 80th Separate Brigade of the Ukrainian Air Assault Forces. There is forward movement in various areas. I thank you. Thank you for your extraordinary bravery.
That was Zelensky during his address on Tuesday. At the same time, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg was in the US.
And the support that we are providing together to Ukraine is now making a difference on the battlefield as we speak. Because the offensive is launched and the Ukrainians are making progress, making advances. It's still early days, but what we do know is that the more land the Ukrainians are able to liberate, the stronger hand they will have at the negotiating table.
He said the weapons NATO has provided are making a difference, and Putin agrees. He says that the war will end and talks will begin if the West stops giving Ukraine weapons. He says that if the weapon supplies stop, Ukraine will be forced to rush to the negotiating table. But it seems the West isn't ready for that just yet. They believe Ukraine needs to liberate more land to gain more bargaining power.
Also today, the department announced additional security assistance to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. This is the Biden administration's 40th presidential drawdown of equipment from DoD inventories for Ukraine since August 2021. It includes key capabilities to aid Ukraine's efforts to retake its sovereign territory as they bravely protect Ukraine's soldiers, civilians, and critical infrastructure.
Yes, the US is giving Ukraine another military aid package. This one will reportedly be worth $325 million. Does that mean that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is actually going poorly? Was Putin really telling the truth? Most likely, both sides have things to hide, and the battlefield will reveal more than the politicians choose to say.
Talking about being duped, China wants to mediate between Israel and Palestine. They've rolled out the red carpet for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. He's in China for 3 days. On Tuesday, the foreign ministers met. China's Qin Gang promised to support Israel-Palestine talks. He offered Chinese wisdom. Wonder what that means. Maybe incursions into your neighboring country or piracy on the high seas, because China will have a lot of wisdom on both of these. But on peace, I don't think so. This visit is less about peace and more about grandstanding. Xi Jinping wants an image makeover, and what better issue than Palestine? The project started last year. President Xi met with Abbas in Saudi Arabia. He promised to help with a two-state solution. Then in April, China's foreign minister got on the job. He dialed his Israeli and Palestinian counterparts. His message: we are ready to help with negotiations. Abbas's visit is the final piece of that project. China can officially claim to be a peace broker now. The question is, can they make an impact? Well, China has historically had good ties with Palestine. They recognized the state in 1988. Both Mahmoud Abbas and his predecessor, Yasser Arafat, have made official trips to Beijing. In fact, this is Abbas's 5th trip to China. Their peace plan is based on the two-state solution. The borders will return to 1967, and East Jerusalem will be Palestine's capital. China says it wants to resolve this issue at an early date. Listen to this.
President Xi Jinping stressed the need to firmly promote a political settlement of the Palestinian question on the basis of the two-state solution and to strengthen international efforts for a peaceful settlement. As a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, China will continue working hard with the international community for a comprehensive, just, and lasting settlement of the Palestinian question at an early date.
Nothing radical there, but the Palestine issue is not just about the plan, it's also about implementation. It's about getting both Israel and Palestine to agree to the plan, and for that you need leverage. Does China have that leverage over Israel? At this point, it's hard to imagine. They've signed a 25-year deal with Israel's biggest enemy, Iran. They're also locked in a conflict with Israel's biggest supporter, the US. So the question doesn't quite make sense. The equation doesn't make sense, rather. Then what is China's endgame here? One objective is the image makeover. Xi Jinping seems to be fed up with the wolf warrior image. He wants to be a statesman now, a man of peace. He's already brokered a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, so naturally Palestine was next. But this vanity project can give indirect gains. For example, more support in the Arab world. You see, young Arabs may not care very much. But among the Arab elite, Palestine is an emotional issue. You support Palestine and you get their support. And that's what Xi Jinping is doing here. He's expected to approve 4 infrastructure projects in the West Bank. He's positioning himself as Palestine's best bet. And if he fails, well, no one will be surprised, will they? Low expectations equal low risk. Xi loses nothing if this policy backfires or if it doesn't work. But he gains a lot by just attempting it. The world should recognize this design. You can't infiltrate your neighbor and preach peace elsewhere. You can't launder your belligerence with peace deals. But that's what China is doing. It is using the realignment in West Asia to gain a foothold there, to displace the United States. And what is Washington doing about it? Well, there's very little they can do at this point. Most Arab countries are moving away from the US as it is. They're exploring ties with Russia and China. Remember the leverage I mentioned. Even America is running out of it. They used Iran to rally Arab countries behind them, but now Saudi Arabia and Iran are mending fences. So Joe Biden's Palestine pitch is a weak one. He wants more diplomatic recognition for Israel. At the same time, he wants to advocate for Palestine. Many would say that's contradictory. Listen to his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, describing that balancing act.
Integration and normalization efforts are not a substitute for progress between Israelis and Palestinians, nor should they come at its expense. Israel's deepened relationships with its partners can and should advance the well-being of the Palestinian people and the prospects for a two-state solution.
That statement is filled with idealism. It's a scarce commodity in geopolitics. It's also a strategy that seldom works. Getting married is like going to hell. Not my words. A Weibo user in China said this. Funny, right? But for China, this is no laughing matter because apparently this is a sentiment shared by many. Last year, China recorded its lowest number of marriages. They dropped to 6.83 million, the lowest since records began back in 1986. Now, China's marriage rate has declined rapidly over the past decade, but despite government push, the Chinese have remained stubborn and single. They don't want to get married. And this only feeds into an ongoing crisis in the country. Our next report tells you more about it.
This is Sun Jiangshu and Shi Si, a couple posing for photos ahead of their wedding. Notice how Shi Si nervously slides his arm around Sun, but not because he wants to, simply because he was asked to by the photographer. Because here's the catch, they are a fake couple, and their wedding, part of a performance orchestrated by an artist named Nut Brother. He brought the two strangers together, so they tie the knot, then divorce within 48 hours. Why? To stir up debate about the institution of marriage in modern-day China.
I think that a lot of people, especially women, can live a good life being single. As far as they are concerned, a family is just a burden they don't need at all. I think you need to think clearly about what you want before you get married and not about fulfilling other people's expectations.
This art performance was held in 2016. 7 years have passed since, but the sentiment remains the same. Millions in China are increasingly questioning marriage, and apparently they don't particularly love it. We aren't saying this, the numbers are. Last year, China recorded its lowest number of marriages. They dropped to 6.83 million, which is the lowest since records began in 1986. Now remember, China didn't always dislike marriage. In fact, they liked it enough to be quite creative with it. Look at these visuals from 2006. These are 50 Chinese couples getting married at an amusement park. Or take these Chinese couples. They're getting married during a mass ice wedding festival.
I think that our love for each other is like ice and snow, pure, white, and beautiful.
Quite dramatic, but also sweet. And for China, definitely better than not wanting to get married at all. The country's marriage rate peaked in 2013. Nearly 13.5 million couples wed. That's nearly double last year's count. Also, more than the entire population of some countries. But in the past decade, China's marriage rate has declined rapidly. And this only feeds into their ongoing demographic crisis. The population is aging. In the next decade, about 400 million people in China will be aged 60 and over. That's 30% of the population. And that's not all. China's birth rates are also falling. Last year, the population shrank for the first time in 6 decades. Warning bells are ringing in the government. They've held mass blind dating events and sought a reduction in bride price. That's the amount paid to a prospective bride's family. The government has also mandated a 30-day cool-off period before divorce. It's launching programs to encourage people to marry, but with limited success. Women in China are increasingly looking at marriage as something used to oppress them. They're demanding equality in child rearing and refuse to marry young. Between 2010 and 2020, the average age for women to get married for the first time increased from 24 to nearly 29. And with soaring unemployment rates in China, marriage is not an option for many young. So while the Chinese government continues to behave like a nosy, distant relative, encouraging young people to get married, it just doesn't seem to be working. Maybe a helping hand could help China, or a matchmaking consultant, like the iconic Seema Taparia from Mumbai.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with China. A strong gust of wind sent a huge canopy flying along with people holding onto it. Some people suffered fractured ribs. In the United States, an uninvited guest took a dip in a backyard swimming pool in Florida. Animal control had to be called in to show the guest out. And in Brazil, a digital exhibition is showing people the beauty of nature through mirrors. And finally, what makes the 14th of June significant? Taking you back in history, on this day in 1949, a monkey was sent to space for the first time. His name was Albert II. The spacecraft carrying the monkey flew till about 134 kilometers, but Albert died due to impact. Back then, countries used to send animals to space to assess their abilities to launch a living organism into space and bring it back alive. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, coming up. Stop. I'll keep them off the furniture. Okay, I've got them. I've got them. My
2023 will be India's year. This year, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. This is China banning the exit of critics from the country. They're not allowed to leave China. Could NATO be coming to Asia? From all accounts, yes. The military alliance is opening its first liaison office in Japan. Beijing doesn't believe in multipolarity or division of powers. It's been quite a fascinating journey. But is the dream run coming to an end now? We ask because startups are going through hard times. There's been a wave of mass sackings. A good cartoon is like a stinging editorial, but sometimes the cartoon itself is a double standard. It's a crass attempt at peddling old and racist ideas about India. If you haven't heard of ChatGPT, you've been living under a rock. It can write your essays and emails, do your math worksheets, clear an MBA exam. The possibilities seem endless.